Thanks so much. And we're going to get started with David Roca.
Baltimore's spy plane program, or wide area persistent surveillance, is an Orwellian nightmare come to life. And now that it has been officially approved, we're suing to prevent it from happening. The technology that Baltimore wants to deploy involves sophisticated cameras developed for the military, mounted on airplanes that can see the entire city and that track the movement of every person or vehicle moving outside. And because the video imagery is stored, it is a virtual time machine, allowing police to go to any time and place and track everyone who came and went from or to there. This comprehensive location tracking is a power that no American government has ever had and that no government in a democracy should have. It is equivalent to having a police officer follow us, each of us, outside all the time in case we might commit a crime. If that happened in real life, I think everyone would clearly understand the privacy and First Amendment implications, and it would never be tolerated. And it's only because this is being done remotely through technology that we're even having this discussion. In this lawsuit, we argue on behalf of our clients, leaders of a beautiful struggle, Erricka Bridgeford and Kevin James, that tracking the movement of everyone in Baltimore every time they go outside violates both the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment. The Fourth Amendment claim is based significantly on the Supreme Court's Carpenter decision in 2018 that government acquisition of long-term location data is a search under the Fourth Amendment. And the First Amendment claim is based on the dangerous and clear and obvious chilling effect on political activities and organizing that is occasioned by the government tracking everywhere that everybody goes. The Baltimore Police Department's claim that this technology doesn't identify people is simply untrue. That is the sole reason that the technology is being deployed. That's the only reason for which it was developed, and that is the only thing that it will do. And it does this in multiple ways. First, simply by knowing where a particular person, or as the police department is fond of saying, pixel, simply by knowing where that person comes from and goes to, that by itself is often sufficient to identify who it is. Second, this technology is tied to and supercharges the Baltimore Police Department's existing network of ground-based cameras and automated license plate readers. And by linking the video aerial image data that is collected to images captured on those fixed devices, people can also be identified. And when the Baltimore Police Department and persistent surveillance systems say, trust us, we will not use this technology in any bad way, we shouldn't trust them. First of all, in a democracy, we're not supposed to simply trust that power will not be abused. And second, if we want to know how they want to use this technology, the best way to look is how they actually used it and what they actually did when they were doing it in secret in 2016. And then they used it not just for the most serious offenses, which is what is claimed now. The most common offense that was tracked was traffic accidents. And they also used it to monitor political protests. And they also lied about how long the data was kept, saying that it was only kept for 45 days, when in fact it was kept indefinitely. We are honored to represent LBS, Ms. Bridgeford, and Mr. James, and I want you to hear from them about why they are joining in this lawsuit. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next, we're going to hear from Kevin James.
So when I heard about this, I thought it was insane. I thought that the last thing that Baltimore City Police needs right now is more power in the form of surveillance. The last thing that the citizens of Baltimore right now is to be watched every minute of every day. I feel like, let me just put it to you like this. Would you try and repair a relationship by spying on someone, right? Like that seems like the last thing that you would do. And to me, it smacks of COINTELPRO, right? If you think about the issues that are plaguing Baltimore, you can think about the violence and you can think about what Ceasefire has been able to accomplish with next to no resources compared to Baltimore City Police, right? So I feel like if we want to make Baltimore better, if we want to make Baltimore safer, we need to invest in the citizens of Baltimore and not in some sort of big brother Orwellian COINTELPRO power grab.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Next, we're going to hear from Erricka Bridgeford. Erricka.
Hi, everybody. So first, I would like to say that for me, the use of this kind of wartime technology is hypocritical of the Baltimore Police Department. And what I mean is, I do, in my activism, in my community work, I often have conversations with police officers. I often, I think there are a lot of good officers on the police force, and a huge part of the conversation when people are addressing crime is that repeat violent offenders are our biggest problem. And so by law enforcement's own logic, they have been a repeat violent offender. Baltimore's police department is right now under a consent decree because as an entity, while there are good officers on the force, as an entity, BPD has been proven to be a repeat violent offender. They've been proven, it's been an entity proven to violate human rights and to be violent. All of the information we've even heard thus far, lying to people all over Baltimore about what you're doing and how you're using information and using information against people. If you understand anything about brain science, those kinds of things, our brains process as threats to our sense of well-being, which means that lying to people in this way and using power in this way are acts of violence. And so as a repeat violent offender, by their own logic, they should not have access to advanced technology that now would give people on the force an opportunity to use this kind of technology to violate people's rights. Also, I think it undermines the work that good officers are trying to do in community. So any officer worth their weight, any officer with a really good heart who understands Baltimore, they are trying to build relationships and build trust in the neighborhoods that they're working in. It is very difficult to build trust when this kind of technology is in place, because it will then erode the trust that officers are trying to build, because people will now know that they're being surveilled in this vast kind of way. And then lastly, I want to say that it absolutely can impact the work that community organizations are doing. And so community organizations in Baltimore are known as safe spaces. We are the people that when we're just walking down the street, if we're known in neighborhoods, if we're known around the city, if our work is trusted, people walk up to us to tell us about horrific things that they're going through in their lives. And so we are able to help connect them with resources. And so to even say that you're going to fly planes in spaces where there's high crime rates, we all know that what that means is Black and brown people around Baltimore will be surveilled more heavily than anybody. And so these are the most vulnerable populations who need resources, who need healing more than anybody else. And those would be the people being surveilled. And so in a space like that, when we're trying to do our community work and get people even involved in helping to heal their own communities, people will absolutely be less likely. We're still going to do the work because nothing stops us from doing the work. And it will be more challenging to do the work when people won't be as willing to have certain kinds of conversations with us so that we can connect them with resources, because they know that not only are we being followed everywhere we go into all of the neighborhoods around Baltimore, but they're being surveilled as well. And so this kind of technology will undermine good policing, it will undermine police-community relationships, and it will undermine good community work that's already being done in our city.
Thank you so much, Ericka. Next, we're going to hear from Adam Jackson, CEO of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle.
Thanks, Meredith. Peace and blessings, everybody. I can just give a little bit of an overview of our organization, what we do, and why we would be particularly vulnerable if a program like this would, or if this program is allowed to continue. So for people who may not know, our organization, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, we're a grassroots think tank located here in Baltimore, and we are a political organization. And so a lot of the time when we're doing political advocacy, it requires that we go to Annapolis to support bills and legislation that positively impact our community, but also at the same time to oppose legislation that harms our community or that won't be beneficial to the Black community. And throughout that process, you make enemies. And so I think it's important that we demystify this whole conversation around what surveillance technology can be used to do, because when we go to Annapolis and we're talking about, stop police accountability and criminal justice reform, oftentimes our opponents are the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, or law enforcement in general. And so we know for a fact that a lot of officers know who we are and that we're constantly being surveilled. And organizations and institutions like ours that are Black run, that do political advocacy, are always surveilled by police. And given all the corruption that we know about the Baltimore City Police Department, knowing about the consent decree, the corruption that was exposed from the gun trace task force, and the myriad of other human rights violations that we see on a daily basis. I mean, just a few days ago, a Baltimore City Police Department officer was coughing on residents in East Baltimore, in East Baltimore projects. Given all we know about that, and adding on top of that, the Baltimore uprising in 2015 after the murder of Freddie Gray, there are all these incentives now for law enforcement to monitor the activity of advocates like myself and my comrades, people like Ericka and Kevin. And so we suspect that this gives more of an opportunity for police to monitor our movements. And it also impedes our work that we're doing in Baltimore because, as Ericka mentioned, when we're talking to people in community, the expectation is that it's safe, that when they're talking to us, there's no governmental institution intervening, that there's no other folks they're talking to or that are watching. And so knowing that a group like ours and people like us are going to be constantly surveilled by this technology and potentially be targeted means that it gives community less of an incentive to talk to us because we're going to be tracked by this technology. And also, in addition to that, to what Kevin said, historically speaking, the governmental apparatus, whether it's federal, local, or statewide, has always used surveillance to monitor the activities of Black and Brown activists. We can always use COINTELPRO as an example of that, something that consistently, a federal program created by the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, that targeted Black activists and many times created the conditions for their death and or murders. And so we oppose any program that gives more resources to law enforcement to monitor advocates and activists in our community. And giving more money, more power, more control to law enforcement is a part of the problem. It's ineffective. And we believe that this lawsuit will help highlight how this will not only be ineffective, but only cause more harm in our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And lastly, we're going to hear from Jay Stanley, who is a policy analyst with the National ACLU. And after that, we'll take questions.
Thank you, Meredith. So this is very much a Baltimore issue, but this is also a national issue. Baltimore is merely the first, and what happens here will set a precedent for what happens in the rest of the nation. This is a major privacy battle. I started working on privacy issues, surveillance issues for the ACLU shortly before 9/11. I've been at this for a while, and this is one of the biggest privacy issues that I've seen come down the pike. This is a technology that we've been watching for years and worrying about the adoption of for years. We published our first piece about wide area aerial surveillance in 2013. We published our first piece about persistent surveillance systems, the company behind this program, later that same year in 2013. And we've been relieved that in the years since that no cities have been willing to adopt this mass surveillance program. But now that day has come, and we're going to find out what road we as a nation are going to go down based a lot on what happens here in Baltimore. I think that if it is accepted in Baltimore, it is allowed to go forward in Baltimore, we can expect to see other big cities, but eventually many communities, perhaps all communities in America, adopt this technology eventually down the road, especially when you consider that the FAA is well on the path towards opening our skies to drones. Now, once you contemplate putting these super powerful cameras on drones instead of on manned aircraft, it becomes much cheaper to do this. It becomes easier, and becomes much more likely to become widespread, because as we've learned in the surveillance area for many years, things that are cheap and easy to do always get overdone. And I guess finally, I would observe that, as somebody who's been working on privacy issues for a long time, aerial surveillance is kind of special. People get very upset about aerial surveillance. And for example, there were years when we were fighting NSA surveillance, we were fighting data mining and data profiling. People often would get much more upset over the concept of drones, even when drones weren't that real yet, of drone aerial surveillance, than they would about the NSA. We can't see the NSA, everybody can see the sky. And I think that that's a lot of why aerial surveillance is a special issue. And that also means that the chilling effects from this kind of a program are likely to be significant, because it does stick in people's mind when they're aware that there's aerial surveillance. So I will leave it there, and I look forward to any questions about from the national perspective that you all might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. Anyone on the call, any reporters on the call, if you want to submit a question via the chat, or you can temporarily take yourself off mute to ask a question and then put yourself back on, please. We'll try to just make sure that we don't have people talking over each other. Thank you. Do we have any questions? All right, the first question is, do you have a sense of when exactly the program is supposed to start?
Our understanding is that the flights have not yet begun, and we'll know more after a hearing with the court, which is starting in a few minutes.
Any other questions? You can take yourself off mute, or you can put them in the chat.
Hi, I'll ask a question. It's Louis with the Baltimore Brew. I was just wondering, I had talked to the deputy city, or the acting city solicitor, Dana Moore, last week, kind of about how she feels as though, while probably privacy is a concern in today's day and age, you can't really expect, I don't know, your privacy to be protected as much as I don't know, I guess maybe like the ACLU would claim it needs to be with its lawsuit. I guess, like, how do you balance, like, I guess, how privacy is kind of less protected in today's day and age, and why this program is a violation of the Fourth Amendment in that way.
Maybe we could, there's probably a legal answer to that question, and maybe some of our, but anyone involved in the case, please, chime in to talk about whether there's any expectation of privacy anymore.
I just like, this is Erricka. I just like to say that there's a difference between expecting not to have as much privacy and just laying down and letting police follow you around all day long every time you leave your house. A police department that they are right now under a consent decree, and they are being surveilled, to turn around and then say, well, you who've already proven that you can't be trusted, you get to now surveil everybody moving around in Baltimore City. To just lay down and take that kind of violation to our human rights is not something, as Baltimoreans, we're just not built like that. We're not built to just say, oh, well, I can't, it's 2020, we can't expect, we got cell phones anyway. Like, that's not the same thing as being like, sure, police, just follow me around all day long. Like, that's not who we are, because it's not right. It's an extreme violation. And to even suggest that it's comparable to us expecting not to have our privacy protected, if we can protect our privacy, then it is our responsibility to do so. And that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, this is Adam. I just wanted to extend on Ericka's point about the difference between just talking about privacy and letting the police follow you around. I mean, as someone who was pretty active during the uprising, a person who was constantly in a position where I had to lead people in very tense, very dangerous situations, surveillance was a real problem. And since then, I've had to change up all of my communications practices, because I didn't know that the police were monitoring my cell phone, my text messages. I didn't know about a lot of the surveillance activity that was happening at the time, because things were really chaotic. And looking back at it, I actually should have been a lot more mad about it than I was. But there were so many things happening at the same time, it was really difficult to get a sense of what the police were doing, and the police were being dishonest about what they were doing. And so and especially when we talk about the planes, because we didn't even know about the planes until after the fact, and then we had to take the plane down. And so I think it's important that to that point that you were making about our privacy is we shouldn't expect to have privacy in this day and age. Well, it's the difference between that when your life is actually on the line and you actually have people who are depending on you to lead you to do work. And if people feel like they're talking to the police because they're being followed by the police, because someone they're talking to is being followed by the police, that significantly hurts and damages your credibility with community, because then you can't really do effective community-based work.
Anyone else want to handle that one?
Yeah, can I speak on that too?
Please do.
Yeah, I just feel like, so the cops are going to have all these resources, all these hours of video, but what's going to happen when somebody has to defend themselves in court? Are they going to have access to those same hours of video? Are they going to be able to say, look, I was not at this place that you said I was at because this video proves it? No, chances are they won't have access to the video, so they're going to be sitting in jail, right? While the police department will have evidence that can exonerate them. Like, that's not acceptable, right? So in terms of like us living in a day and age where we should have lower expectations for privacy, it's one thing for somebody to go behind you and look at all the stuff that you posted on social media. It's a very different thing for somebody to be able to see where you went from, the sun up till sundown, every day of the week, every day of the month, every day of the year. That's a different matter entirely, right? It's a different matter when you're trying to organize. It's a different matter when you're just trying to live your life and protect the people who are close to you, right? I don't think that we should just roll over and give up that sort of expectation of privacy that we all have.
And this is Jay. I would just say from a sort of privacy advocate's perspective, it is true that we've lost a lot of privacy in recent years, but three things. Number one, a lot of that privacy has been lost to private companies like Facebook and Google and so forth. And this is the police. That's different. Google might have a lot of power, but they can't put you in jail. Number two, there has been a big reaction to the loss of privacy. We're starting to see Congress is looking at passing overarching privacy laws. California passed an overarching privacy law. Human beings do need privacy, and the technologies move so fast that a lot of companies and others have grabbed a lot of power because they could, but now we're already seeing the pendulum swim back the other way. And number three, even if we have lost privacy in other areas, this would represent a major new transfer of power from people to law enforcement. And just looked at on its own, that would not be a wise thing for Americans to accept.
Thank you, Jay.
On
We'll
that, oh, sorry. If it's helpful, I can talk a little bit about the Fourth Amendment perspective too.
Yeah, please do. I'll circulate your this. Ashley Gorski, staff attorney with the National ACLU's National Security Project.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to underscore that the Supreme Court just very recently made clear that the Fourth Amendment protects the privacy of a whole of an individual's movements, including when that individual is in public. And it did that in the ruling that David Rocha referred to at the outset of this conference, the Carpenter ruling. And it also made clear in that decision that courts need to be especially careful in an era of advanced technology, and they need to look critically at the rules that they're applying and think about how those rules should apply in a new technological era. The idea being that with this advanced technology, because the government has more power than it's ever had before, if anything, Fourth Amendment doctrine needs to become more privacy protective than it was in the past when the government didn't have this kind of supercharged power to track where everyone is and what they're doing at all times.
Thank you, Ashley. We do have two questions. The first is, should the program move forward, do you believe that whatever data is collected for research purposes may be invalid because the pandemic is keeping everyone home? Is there anyone who can speak to that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question one more time? I was kissing my son as he's an essential worker going out to work.
Absolutely. The question really is, they're saying that with this pilot program, that they're going to be collecting data for research purposes, but so much of the population is at home because of the pandemic. And do we think that that is going to impact the value of the data that's being collected right now?
Okay, so this is Erricka. So for me, that actually underscores this point about who's going to be surveilled. So if people are being told to stay in the house right now, then who's going to be outside? The most vulnerable populations of people who can't afford to be outside, people who have housing instability and they're living from couch to couch anyway, and so they're outside a lot during the day. People who are in drug recovery, like when you think about, well, then who's even outside to be surveilled? Those demographics of people are our most vulnerable populations of people in Baltimore, and more heavily Black and brown people once again. And so to say that we're surveilling people who are outside while telling everybody to stay in the house, and then saying, well, hey, we're doing this for your own safety as we watch you from the sky, those of you who can't afford to stay in the house, then what you're saying is you are peeing all over our city and telling us that it's raining. That's what that feels like to me. And it means you are then doing that to the people, limiting people's access to resources, because the most vulnerable populations would be the people that community organizations and good police officers would be reaching out to the most to help them get the resources they need, because clearly they need resources, because how come you're not in the house? Well, everybody is supposed to be in the house right now. clearly you need help, right? And now those people, again, will be less likely to say what's going on in their lives, which means they'll be less likely to get the resources that they need. And so you're undermining good work for the most vulnerable populations in our city.
Would anyone else want to take that one, or should we move to the next question?
The only point I'll make is about the data. I don't think that the data will be useful because it's going to be used by the police, and the police, law enforcement, gathering more information and more research about Black people to use for its own purposes, which are I can't dictate whether or not it's nefarious or with ill intent, but it should be. We have history to guide us on why giving the police the ability and the power to monitor Black people 24/7, 365 is a bad idea.
And just following up on that point and responding to one of the questions in the group chat now, the questions that Commissioner Harrison has said that the aim of the pilot program is to determine whether the aerial surveillance will in fact work. And deploying the surveillance in the middle of a pandemic when people are social distancing, when there are stay-at-home orders, it's mind-boggling to me in terms of the stated objectives of the program. Like, as Adam was just saying, the data that they're collecting is not going to be able to show them whether this surveillance has any effect on crime because we're not operating in ordinary circumstances. There's no control group. This is extraordinary. These are extraordinary circumstances. They're unprecedented circumstances, and it's not the time to be deploying this technology, especially when they're saying that the purpose of doing it is to gather data. But it's also not just about gathering data. It's about gathering information for law enforcement to use within this 180-day period. And that's important to keep in mind as well.
And I would like to add that since they snuck and did this before, they can use information from before to see if it's a crime fighting strategy. So I just saw an article yesterday where in the past, the commissioner said that he was against spy planes because it was not a proven crime fighting strategy. So to now be for it to see, well, let's see if it works. How about go back to 2016 when, you know, they snuck and did it. Did murders happen during those times? During that time while the planes were flying? And were the planes able to help really stop murder from happening or to put people who had killed somebody in jail and get them off of the streets of Baltimore? Like, they already have that information about if the spy planes were actually helpful in fighting crime or making communities more safe. And I would argue that what you will probably find when you go back and look at that is that it's already been shown that it wasn't so helpful that it was worth following everybody in the city for however long the pilot would need to take place.
Yeah, I would just say that I think if the restrictions get more and more severe regarding how many times you can go out during this pandemic, they can definitely use the information that they get by spying on people to see the vulnerable populations that Ericka was talking about who would be in violation of these stricter measures, right? That's what they're gonna see, and they don't need a plane to see that, right? If you wanna punish people for not having access to resources, that's what this plane is gonna allow you to do during a pandemic. It's not rocket science. They need to be putting that money somewhere else.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. The question is, there was a court case that used the plane's footage that showed misconduct by police officers. BPD has said that the footage could not be used for anything other than what they intend, which did not include police misconduct. Will that still be the case, or is the ACLU trying to change that as the program goes forward now?
I'm happy to answer that, and others can follow on. Our objective here is to make sure that these planes don't get into the air, period. And if they're not in the air, then there won't be footage for anyone to access. Commissioner Harrison, in his community presentations about the pilot program, has said that the information will be used in connection with or target crimes, and that he can also approve uses on a case-by-case basis. People have asked him about whether this information could be used if there are concerns about police misconduct, police brutality, and he's said that, you know, if it's serious enough, basically in his discretion, if he decides that it's serious enough, it could be, but the rules aren't clear, and that's another one of the major problems here.
Yeah, the expectation that Baltimore City residents would allow a corrupt, incompetent police department to decide when it wants to use footage from a spy plane that it put in the air for whenever it wants to use it for is ridiculous, and it's almost insulting to the intelligence of the residents who live here. You know, it's kind of the same reaction that people had to the 2016 DOJ report in the Baltimore City Police Department. A lot of Black people have been telling folks about these issues with police for a while, issues of corruption with police for a while, and they didn't become legitimate until the consent decree came out. Something like this, it's going to lead to a pathway where there's going to be more monitoring and surveillance by police, and we may not even know all of the things that it was used for until way after the fact. And so the expectation that we're supposed to sign up again, to say again, will allow the police to have sweeping powers to surveil us and to potentially abuse residents without any expectation of real accountability. And then you have folks saying that we're going to put all these things in place to monitor the system. But again, it's the same problem that we've had in the city for quite some time. Police policing police, them telling each other what they're going to do, them and us trusting them as law enforcement officials to do the right thing. When in reality, they have not proven or demonstrated that they are trustworthy at this point, because they're still under the consent decree, and we're still trying to hash out a lot of the issues that were evident in the DOJ report and after the Gun Trace Task Force corruption scandal. So at this point, there should be no expectation that any resident here will trust the police to do as they say or to use it as they say they're going to use it.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing to that? And so I do a lot of work around rape culture and domestic violence. And in abusive relationships, that is exactly the kind of thing an abuser says, right? The person who has power in the relationship and a power imbalance. They've abused you previously, they, again, being a repeat violent offender. And then when it's something that they want to do, they say, you don't get to tell me, the one I've abused, you don't get to tell me how to do this thing I want to do to you. I get to decide how that thing will impact me, and I get to decide how that thing is going to impact you. That is called being in an abusive relationship. And so, and that is a misuse of power in the power imbalance by the abuser to even say something like that, to like the unfairness of, well, I'll decide if it's serious enough. If police brutality happens, if police misconduct happens, which again are acts of violence, right? Even if it's misconduct that's emotional or mental mistreatment of Baltimore residents, those are still acts of violence. And so to say that the police department gets to decide if those acts of violence are serious enough for their own technology to be used to prove that one of their own has done something, when good officers will say that those officers should not be on the force, right? That they want those officers removed because those kind of officers make it harder for good officers to build trust in community. So again, it makes zero sense.
Thank you. We have one more question. Do you believe the average Baltimore resident will be aware that they are under surveillance? Does the city have a responsibility to send out mailers or something similar to make residents aware of the surveillance?
You know, at the risk of being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, most Baltimore residents know they're under surveillance anyway. We know that the police are watching us on a fairly consistent basis, whether it's through the City Watch program, whether it's through the license plate readers, whether they're just following us around in the street. We know we're under surveillance. Do we specifically know that there's airplanes in the sky that will be recording us 24/7 potentially. I think most of us think that's happening already because of the levels of corruption that have already occurred in the Baltimore City Police Department. And the question around, should they be responsible for public awareness about it? You know, they could do that, but it really doesn't get at the issue. You know, notifying someone like after the fact when they had no input in the beginning with a privately funded a spy plane system, it's like, that's like, oh, after the fact you're going to let me know. You're just going to let me know that you screwed me over entirely and that you're going to be violating my rights. You know, so whether or not they decide to do that is really here nor there. It's really, should it even be happening to begin with, and what say so do residents have in this process at all? Because once we start talking about public awareness campaigns, now we're spending more money on a system that we should not be using with, and people, even if they are aware, is there anything they can do to combat it? You know, these are all the questions that are kind of up in the air when, and people instead are focusing on, you know, should we tell people, which is really not the issue.
Thanks to everyone, plaintiffs and attorneys. Then we have no more questions. Thanks everyone for your time. Thanks to the reporters for covering this today. We appreciate your attention to this really important issue. Please reach out to us later if you need something additional. We're going to be posting this, we can make available this recording today if you need a direct access to it, and we'll also be posting it on our Facebook page later today. Thanks so much, everyone. Take good care and be safe.